A few days ago, one of my regular customers came into the strip club where I work, walked straight up to me, and started screaming. Not talking, not arguing, screaming. Loud enough to be heard over the music. According to him, I had dumped him. The problem? We were never together. Not for a day, not for an hour, not even for a minute. Yet somehow in his mind we had a relationship, a serious one. And when he read one of my recent blog posts and realized I was going on dates, he completely lost it. That moment wasn't the beginning of the story, it was the ending. Because what happened that night was the result of almost 2 years of something I've never talked about publicly. Today I'm going to tell you about one of the strangest, most exhausting, and honestly most disturbing people I've ever met. A man who spent thousands of dollars at the club. A man who genuinely believed we were in a relationship. A man who proposed to me. A man who thought our manager was his biological mother, and a man who taught me a lesson I wasn't expecting to learn. This is not really a story about him, it's a story about comfort zones, dependency illusions, and what happens when reality finally crashes into fantasy. So let's start from the beginning. I first met him at the end of 2024. At the moment I saw him, I had a feeling something wasn't right. I can't explain exactly what it was. Sometimes you just meet someone and immediately sense that they're carrying something heavy inside them. Something broke. At first he seemed harmless. Just another customer. Then he started coming back again and again and again. Before long, he was showing up almost every single day. Not just to see me, by the way. He would spend money on other dancers too. But over time, he became one of my regular customers. And when I say regular, I mean regular. This man treated the strip club like a full-time job. Nearly every day for almost 2 years, spending thousands and thousands of dollars. The more I got to know him, the more pieces of the puzzle started falling into places. He was originally from Michigan. He had moved to California to get away from his family. When he arrived, he was already going through a divorce that, as far as I know, still isn't finalized. And one thing I noticed very quickly was that whenever life became difficult, he ran from it. He ran from his family, he ran from responsibility, and later he would literally run away from conversations whenever he didn't like what he was hearing. Shortly after arriving in California, he attempted suicide and ended up in a psychiatric facility. Personally, I've never believed it was a genuine attempt to end his life. To me, it felt more like a desperate cry for attention. Now he's the strange part. He has money, a lot of money. As far as I understand it, comes from a family business. But despite having money, he doesn't really have a life. He doesn't work. I've never known him to work. Honestly, I don't think he's worked a day in his life. He lives in hotels, not a house, not a permanent apartment, hotels. For almost the entire time I've known him, he's been moving from one hotel to another. There was only one time He rented an apartment, and even then he didn't stay for the full lease. He left Michigan, came back, and wasn't allowed back into the apartment, which wasn't exactly surprising. At one point, he showed me pictures of the place. He had literally covered the walls with drawings and writings. That's the kind of person we're talking about. Eventually, he became one of my biggest regulars. Most of the time, he would book VIP for hours. And honestly, nothing interesting ever happened. We would talk. Sometimes he would sleep. Sometimes he would ask for a massage. But every single visit came with the same thing: negativity. Endless negativity. His life was terrible, everyone hated him, everyone wanted to hurt him. He was lonely, he had no reason to live, he wanted to die, everybody else should die too. The topics changed, but the energy never did. Every visit felt like sitting through the same dark storm over and over again. And every single time I tried to pull the conversation somewhere more positive. I listened, I encouraged him, I tried to help. Looking back, I probably spent more time acting like an unpaid therapist than a dancer. And yes, there were also hygiene issues. In the beginning, he used to come into the club with feet that smelled absolutely terrible. And if he took his shoes off during a VIP session, trust me, everyone knew about it. Not just me. The smell was impossible to ignore, even outside of the room. Eventually that stopped, but later it became something else. He started showing up smelling like he hadn't showered in weeks. Like deodorant had never been invented. And then he would hug me. I'm not going to lie, it was disgusting. But I never said anything because I didn't want to hurt his feelings. Not that he appreciated any of it. The reality is that none of this was ever about friendship, it was business. And at the time, I tolerated a lot because nobody comes to a strip club that often and spends that much money. By the time I learned about his diagnosis, I already knew something was seriously off. The diagnosis didn't surprise me. If anything, they answered questions I didn't even know how to ask. And before I continue, let me be clear about something. I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist. I'm simply telling you what I personally witnessed and experienced. What I do know for a fact is that I saw the paperwork myself. He had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, ADHD, PTSD, and generalized anxiety disorder. And suddenly a lot of things started making sense because from the very beginning, he believed we were in a relationship. Not that he wanted a relationship, not that he hoped for one someday. He believed that we were already together. He genuinely believed it. The strange thing is that he wasn't only dating me. According to him, he was also in relationships with other dancers at the club. At one point, he started telling me about our life, our future together. His version of our future. Apparently, one day he, I, and another dancer would all live together under the same roof. Some kind of bizarre polygamous arrangement that existed only inside his head. And honestly, that wasn't even close to the strangest thing I heard from him. The problem was that arguing with him was completely pointless. If you told him something wasn't true, he wouldn't stop and think about it. He wouldn't question it. He would laugh, then he'd continue believing exactly what he already believed. Reality simply had no authority inside his world. For example, he became convinced that one of our managers was actually his biological mother. Not a mother figure, not someone who reminded him of his mother, his actual mother, the woman who gave birth to him. And he believed it completely. At one point, he even asked her for permission to marry me. Yes, you heard that correctly. He proposed to me. And around the same time, I was looking for a house to rent. Meanwhile, he was telling people that we were house hunting together and that we would soon be moving in together. One of my favorite stories involved his car. Twice he told me his car had been stolen and then somehow returned. The first culprit was supposedly his elderly aunt. The second was the police, because obviously law enforcement has endless free time to borrow random people's cars, take them for a joyride, and then return them to their parking spot. Personally, I have a much less exciting theory. I think he simply forgot where he parked. He genuinely believed these things. That's what made it so difficult to deal with. And because you weren't arguing with a lie, you were arguing with someone's reality. And over time, I started noticing other things too. There were moments when he appeared to be responding to voices that nobody else could hear. There were endless stories about people watching him, following him, tracking him, plotting against him, conspiracies, civilians, enemies everywhere, the kind of stories that would go on and on and on. Eventually, my brain developed a defense mechanism. I would sit there nodding at the appropriate moments, pretending to listen while mentally checking out of the conversation entirely. I wasn't being rude, I was surviving. Because spending hours absorbing that much negativity weeks after weeks is exhausting. And the truth is, I didn't want all of that living inside my head. Then came one of the most ridiculous conversations we ever had. Over a year ago, when we met, I told him that I had worked in the adult industry. To this day, he still watches those old videos. And one day he said, "You refuse to let me support you financially, but then you go, put on a wig, and shoot porn. You're a prostitute." I honestly didn't even know how to respond. So I asked him what video he was talking about. It was an old video from years ago, so old that I hadn't even had my breast augmentation yet. And apparently, according to the reality inside his head, I put on a wig, take my boobs off, and secretly continue filming adult movies. That's how disconnected some of these accusations were from reality. The worst part wasn't even the accusation itself. It was what happened afterward. Nothing, no apology, no acknowledgement, nothing. I explained the difference between a porn actress and a prostitute, a distinction that should be obvious to any adult. But he never apologized, not once. The truth is, I got comfortable. Not comfortable with him, comfortable with money. Especially after I switched to day shift for a while. Without even realizing it, I had built a situation where a huge part of my income depended on one person. And that's a dangerous place to be. Because when your income depends on someone else's decisions, you stop being free. You start thinking differently, you start calculating everything, you start asking yourself questions you never should have to ask. What if he doesn't come in today? What if he stops spending money? What if he gets angry? At some point, I realized I had created a situation I couldn't stand. The money was good, but he had pushed me to my limit. He constantly wanted something from me, constantly needed something, constantly demanded attention, reassurance, emotional energy, and the worst part was never knowing what would happen next. What new obsession would appear in his head tomorrow? What new accusation? What new fantasy? Would he show up? Would he disappear? Would he suddenly decide he hated me? Living with that uncertainty became exhausting. Over time, I found myself hating the entire situation. I hated the pressure, I hated the dependency, I hated the feeling that my life was no longer entirely my own. Every visit felt like another shift with an emotionally exhausting coworker I couldn't escape. Because it was never simple. There was always some new crisis, some new drama, some new fantasy, some new problem that somehow became my problem. And I started feeling trapped, not by him, by the situation. My life no longer felt like it belonged to me. My schedule revolved around him, my income revolved around him. Even my writing started revolving around him. And that was the part that bothered me the most. Because if you have followed my blog or this channel for a while, you know that writing is important to me. It's how I process things, it's how I tell my stories, it's how I make sense of my life. But when you're financially dependent on someone, even partially, you start censoring yourself. You start wondering whether you should say certain things, whether you should publish certain stories, whether someone will get offended, whether there will be consequences. And I hated that feeling. I hated feeling like I had handed over a piece of my freedom. So eventually I made a decision. I told him I was going back to the night shift. If he wanted to see me, he could come at night. If not, that was fine too. Honestly, I didn't care anymore. I was choosing my freedom, and that was the moment everything changed. Because somehow in his mind, that meant I had abandoned him, that I had left him, I had broke up with him. A relationship that existed only inside his head had apparently came to an end. Meanwhile, from my perspective, I finally felt relieved. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. I got my life back. I got my independence back. And most importantly, I got my voice back. I stopped worrying about protecting his feelings. I stopped organizing my life around someone else's delusions. And then I published my previous article, the one where I mentioned going on dates, the article that shattered whatever fantasy I had been living in. And then came last Wednesday. He walked into the club looking absolutely miserable. I could tell something was wrong immediately. He came straight up to me and said, I read the article. I said, okay, and then he exploded. He started screaming loud enough to overpower the music. According to him, I had dumped him. According to him, I was going on dates and sleeping with people. According to him, I was a prostitute. Then, before I could say a single word in response, he turned around and walked away. Just like that. Honestly, I wasn't scared, but my hands were shaking. My voice was shaking too when I walked over to security. And the more I thought about it afterward, the angrier I became. Because the audacity of that moment was unbelievable. Imagine coming to someone's workspace and telling them that you don't want to see them anymore. What exactly was I supposed to do with that information? You don't want to see me? Then don't come to the club. Problem solved. But apparently even that was too much to ask. Because the next night he came back. After everything, after the screaming, after the insults, after the scene he created, he came right back. At that point, management stepped in. He was told not to approach me, not to talk to me, not to sit near me. And now, before anyone misunderstands what I'm saying, let me make one thing clear. I know he's mentally ill. I know he's struggling, but that doesn't automatically excuse the way he treats other people. After everything I've experienced with him, I've come to one conclusion with a complete certainty. Nothing can compete with the reality he has created in his own mind. I tried. For a long time I tried being patient, I tried being supportive, I tried redirecting conversations. Sometimes I even found myself saying things or handling situations in ways that were completely out of character for me, simply because I was trying to keep peace. None of it mattered, because in the end, he always returned to the same place, the world he had built inside his own head. And nobody else gets a vote in that world. Not me, not reality, not common sense. Nobody. Do you know what the biggest lie he ever had told me was? I love you. He said it over and over again. And I never believed it, not once, because What he called love never looked like love to me. It looked like obsession, it looked like dependency, it looked like someone trying to fill a void with another human being. Whenever I asked him about his goals in his life, his dreams, his plans for the future, the answer was always basically the same. He wanted a wife. That's it. Nothing else seemed to matter. No ambitions, no purpose, no passions, just another person, someone who would always be there, someone who would never leave, someone who would give him attention 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Of course, he would deny that's what he wanted, but that's exactly what I saw. And the truth is, nobody's going to do that. Not because people are cruel, not because nobody cares, but because that's not how healthy relationships work. No one person can become someone else's entire world, and no amount of money changes that. Eventually, reality catches up with fantasy. Eventually, illusion breaks. Eventually, people are forced to see what was always there. And honestly, looking back now, I think this situation did me a favor. This whole experience forced me out of my comfort zone I had been sitting in for far too long. It forced me to admit that I had become comfortable with a situation that wasn't healthy for me. Comfortable with dependency, comfortable with limitations, comfortable with putting up with things I shouldn't have been putting up with. And once I saw that clearly, I couldn't unsee it. So, while this story started with someone else's fantasy, it ended with a realization about my own life. I don't want to stay stuck. I don't want fear, convenience, or financial comfort making decisions for me. I want to keep moving forward. I'm not saying I'm leaving the industry tomorrow, that's not the point. The point is that something shifted. The point is that I finally recognized a situation that had become a trap. And once you recognize a trap, it's a lot harder to stay inside it. So, maybe that's the real ending of this story. Not a man screaming in the strip club, not an argument, not even a collapse of a fantasy. The real ending is that I got my freedom back. And for the first time in a long time, I'm excited to see where that freedom takes me next.